how did your background in structural engineering relate to this new role that you have in insurance?
The insurance industry is full of a very wide range of people. And so when somebody like a structural engineer who's highly pedigreed and has deep expert knowledge comes in and says, I want to solve this specific problem, there's a certain crack in the door that opens up that might not be available to other folks. And that crack in the door gets even wider when you align your interests with the insurers and say, you know what, two things.
What's it like to go from structural engineering to the entrepreneurial insurance industry, and how do these two industries overlap to make resilient communities? In this episode, we're joined by Kate Stillwell, PE, MBA, and president of Parametric Insurance at Neptune Flood. We'll talk about her journey from structural engineering to entrepreneurship, the lessons she's learned building innovative solutions, and how having great mentors influenced her career. If you're a structural engineer looking to grow your influence or discover the lessons learned from the ups and downs of entrepreneurship, you won't want to miss this episode. Before we jump in, I wanted to tell you about our AEC PM Connect event, where emerging and experienced leaders can learn about real-world strategies to drive performance, empower teams, and lead with purpose. Visit aecpmconnect.com and register today. We currently have events in Kansas City and New Jersey, with more coming. I'm your host, Matt Picardal, and this is the Structural Engineering Channel. Kate, thanks so much for joining us. Can you share a bit about yourself and the journey that you had from structural engineering into entrepreneurship and your current role now at Neptune Flood Insurance?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really enjoy being on the podcast. You're doing great work. So, one of the central questions of structural engineering, and particularly earthquake engineering or engineering to design against any natural hazard, is what's the incentive? What's the motivation for the building owner to want to make their building stronger than necessary, better than code? And, unless there's a really tangible motivation, then it's really hard for an owner to justify being able to protect their occupants to the best possible level and not necessarily just to the minimum standard. And so trying to make this connection between a financial incentive and making a stronger, more resilient built environment led me kind of naturally to insurance, because insurance is right now the way that those financial incentives work.
And yeah, that was a thing that, at least in California with all the earthquakes, I mean, I talked to an insurer and I talked to him about earthquakes. He was curious about it. I was like, do you guys take that into account? I don't think a lot of them even know like how we design buildings as structural engineers. Like, no, we design them so they're going to have damage, but if there's a big earthquake, you might need to tear it down. Yeah, I think the general public doesn't know, right?
Oh, yeah. That's the dirty little secret of structural engineering, is that we design buildings to have a crumple zone, to be to be a throwaway building, to be a total loss in the name of safety. And so in order for it not to be a disposable building, the owners have to work, and the insurance companies need to know this, to work for, having a building that not just protects the occupancy, but also protects the economic resilience of not just the building, but the community around it.
And so when you got into insurance, is that kind of how you wanted to, I guess, better make them aware or better protect the owners from these types of hazards in terms of resilience and what may or may not be covered by the current insurance back then?
Yeah, what really weighed heavily on my heart, and still does, is the fact that earthquake insurance in particular has such a low take-up rate. Take-up rate is insurance jargon for the percentage of people who buy, right? So in California, it's hovering around 10, 11, 12%, depending on whether you count residential and commercial or just residential only. Or what that means is that after the next big earthquake, the amount of money flowing in for economic recovery is going to be a tiny fraction of what's needed to stimulate the economy to do a complete recovery. Because not only is the insurance uptake low, but also FEMA is the first to admit that they're too little too late. And also, more than half of us are living paycheck to paycheck with $400 or less in savings. And this is not just the poorest of the poor. These are our friends and neighbors. And so The question is, how do we stimulate more economic stimulus from the private sector after the big natural disaster? And so I went to business school with this like big question of, okay, how do we get more money flowing in and how do we connect it to the built environment? And that's where I learned about this notion of parametric insurance, which is a pre-agreed lump sum delivered upon occurrence of a parameter. And a light bulb went off. I was like, oh, that's what Californians need. They need just a little bit of money to get them over the hump to be able to plow back and help their neighbors, even if they can't afford the full coverage earthquake insurance for their home. And that was the birth of my idea for Jumpstart. And it was really a first of its kind introduction of parametric insurance at the consumer level in any developed country across the world. And it was a testament to the openness of the Department of Insurance, the California Department of Insurance, to facilitate making this product available.
And so for parametric insurance, so is that essentially you were mentioning something about I'm not too familiar with it, but about the price range. So regular people that may not have all of the money to, if a big earthquake happens, they're still eligible to get that type of insurance. Is that kind of there?
Yes. Yes. So parametric insurance can be structured in many ways, but the way that we structured it was so that it was a, a low dollar amount lump sum, not enough to rebuild your house, just enough to get a jump start on the recovery process, which is why we called the company Jumpstart. So it's 10,000, 20,000, maybe $40,000 if you can, afford that amount, but not
Yeah.
$400,000. And the idea is make it more affordable, but also make it feel like, what, you are going to get this money no matter what, and you can spend it on anything you want, whether you have damage or not. You don't have to be a homeowner. You can be a renter. You
Mm.
can use it to move back to Ohio where you moved from, or you can use it to pay for the fact that the school is closed and you're going to have to take off work for 2 months or whatever it is. So yes, it does. It is a type of product that can make insurance more accessible to more people.
Yeah. How did your background in structural engineering relate to this new role that you have in insurance?
I gotta say, the insurance industry is full of a very wide range of people, some of whom are very highly educated, like structural engineers are highly educated, and some of whom really just pulled themselves up from the bootstraps and maybe didn't even graduate from high school. And there are underwriters in Lloyd's of London who kind of chuckle and pat themselves on the back when they tell the story of not graduating from high school. And so when somebody like a structural engineer who's highly pedigreed and has deep expert knowledge comes in and says, I want to solve this specific problem, there's a certain crack in the door that opens up that might not be available to other folks. And that crack in the door gets even wider when you align your interests with the insurers and say, you know what, two things. We want to help you make more money, but also we want to create good in the world. And we want to make sure that insurance is at the heart of creating good in the world. And so it's a social mission that really appeals to their need for
And
publicity.
when you were starting Jumpstart, I imagine it couldn't have been easy since it was probably a different industry, right? What were some of the biggest challenges that you had to overcome to make that a reality?
Well, the insurance licensing exam takes about 1/100th the amount of time, effort, and knowledge as the structural engineering licensing exam. So just saying, if you're a structural engineer, it's going to be no problem for you to get
Yeah.
an insurance license if you want to. But what was a big barrier is the relationships. So, like most industries, but structural engineering might be a notable exception. Folks who get business are the folks who have the relationships. Structural engineering is a refreshing difference
Yeah.
because you get it mostly based on your qualifications with some influence on relationships. But insurance is all about who you know. So it just takes time and pounding the pavement to leverage the credibility that you might already have to then have repeated interactions and get face time in front of the decision makers and to figure out who the decision makers are and it's almost like political navigation. So that was a bigger hurdle than I expected. One thing that was not as much of a hurdle that most folks think should be like they expect it to be a hurdle is the regulatory framework. So the regulators actually are really open to innovation, especially innovation that gets more consumers protected in more innovative ways, because their job of the Department of Insurance is to protect consumers, and mostly to protect them from insurance fraud. But also part of protecting consumers is getting insurance protection to more consumers. And so when there are gaps like there are for earthquake or for flood insurance, they're very receptive to ideas that will get more people coverage.
In the AEC industry, skilled project managers are the backbone of success. EMI's AEC PM Certification offers tailored training, ongoing support, and exclusive access to premium content that keeps your team sharp and effective. From foundational training to advanced leadership tools, set your team apart with certified growth. Learn more at aecpm.com. That's aecpm.com.
Looking back across your ventures, what was one thing that you would absolutely do again? And what about one thing that you would approach differently?
So absolutely do again. One thing in common across all of the ventures that you mentioned in the introduction is needing to collaborate across multiple disciplines. And that's something I learned, had a great background and experience in structural engineering, because we have to collaborate across different disciplines that have different agendas and different points of view, and who don't work for us. So we don't have the leverage of saying, okay, well, you have to do this. And so needing to collaborate within insurance, you need to collaborate with the deep pockets, because an insurance company needs reinsurance, which is insurance for insurance companies, in order to cover hazards like earthquakes and floods that cause damage to a lot of people all at once, all together. Because the insurance company itself is great for uncorrelated risks like theft, fire, burglary, and things like that. But once everybody has a risk all at once, then the insurance company needs reinsurance in order to cover that risk. So as an insurance company, you need to collaborate with the reinsurance, but you also have to collaborate with the external agents, who also are not your employees. They're just independent agents. You have to collaborate with the Department of Insurance. You have to collaborate with technology providers, and having a partnership mindset that's humble and recognizing that none of us can do this alone is a huge asset to any venture. I did not fully appreciate for Jumpstart in particular. And it's a lesson I've carried over into my next for-profit venture, which is, as you mentioned, Firebreak. I did not appreciate the gravity of how long it would take and how much personal turmoil it would create for me as a founder. And so when people ask me, should I, make the jump from structural engineering or whatever industry they're in to becoming an entrepreneur? And I said, you have to take a hard look at your personal finance situation and your personal wherewithal, because there's so much rejection, and it is not for the faint of heart. And there were times when I was literally having a nervous breakdown, quite literally. I'm not using literally in the figurative sense. Having a nervous breakdown, getting to, that position of having less than $400 in the bank. And if you're married, if you have kids, that's a very vulnerable place to be. And I did not appreciate how much stress that would be, but it's something that all founders that I've talked to share. And that, in my next venture, realized, okay, we need to scale back our ambitions in order to deliver at a more steady pace, in order not to put ourselves in this sort of high-low situation. And I'm going to tell you a story. So in 2017, Jumpstart was all set to sell our first policy. We had been working for a year and a half with the reinsurer, so that they got really comfortable with the modeling, the analysis numbers of whether we were charging enough money, and also the regulatory issues of, are we positioning ourselves fairly? And then the technology matters of, are we going to be able to exchange data properly? Are we going to be able to deliver on getting money where it needs to go just upon occurrence of this data parameter? Okay, we were all set up to go. This was August 17th, 2017. We were due to launch August 24th, 2017. And the reinsurer called me on August 17th, 7 days before, said, actually, one of my bosses got cold feet. We're not going to be able to move forward with this contract at this time. And I know how much work that we put in. They literally put millions of dollars of their staff time into this. I know how much work this was for you, but we're just not going to be able to support it. But we can't go live. We can't start selling policies unless we have the assurances that we're going to be able to make good on our promises. So all of a sudden, the launch was off. And on that day, I had to fire our entire team, which at that time was 7 people, not a lot, but 700, no matter how many people it is, it's a heartbreaking experience. And We were just about to pull the trigger on raising an additional several $100,000, but now the premise of raising that money was gone. And so, the idea of being able to bring in money for the next year and a half was completely gone. And what we did was two of the employees, almost on a volunteer basis, on a deferred compensation basis, agreed to come to the industry conference, which is called InsurTech Connect, which is held in Las Vegas every year. And at that time, we had just bought one of these earthquake simulators that's a trailer that is towed behind a pickup truck, and it's on hydraulic actuators that make the trailer bounce up and down. And so we said, you know what, let's take the trailer to the conference. So here was the trailer in Caesar's Palace, right in the middle of Caesar's Palace, bouncing and jolting all the attendees of the conference. These, insurance people who were all wearing, navy blue jackets and khaki pants. And the line was like 100 people long of people who wanted to ride in the earthquake simulator. And during the conference,
Whoa.
there was a tweet that said, the best thing about the InsurTech conference is the Jumpstart shaker. And sure enough, the person who made that tweet was the innovation representative of another reinsurer who we ended up going live with about 8 months later. And so this last ditch publicity stunt ended up paying off, but there was just this 6 weeks of complete heart-wrenching heartache of not knowing whether or not we'd make it or not, and being on the financial edge.
Yeah, it's like a roller coaster
Oh,
where
totally.
everything it's set to go, but then it's just that one thing that goes wrong. And then how are you going to recover? And then somehow, some way, you find a way to make it happen. And sometimes that's all you need, right? Like that, you need that one big opportunity to just get it going. But
Yeah,
if you're
and
not,
that's what
then
resilience
Mhm.
is, right? Is like this
Yeah.
terrible thing happens, and all you need is just a little seed to get you back going again. And that's the whole
Oh, yeah.
premise of just getting a little bit of money to be able to face this terrible thing that just happened.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's cool how both of those relate in terms of in a business, but also if a natural disaster happens. What about I know you've co-founded organizations like the U.S. Resiliency Council and the Global Earthquake Model, I believe. And from those experiences, what do you think structural engineering professionals can learn from this startup world and these collaborative resilience efforts? Is there anything that structural engineers can do to apply that probably in their profession?
Yes. So both the USRC and the GEM Foundation were born out of committee work. So I'd say the number one most value add thing you can do in your career and for your profession is to participate in committees, because that's where you'll collaborate with folks from other companies and other industries, but also learn kind of what the industry needs vis-a-vis the the related industries, vis-a-vis architecture, vis-a-vis building management, vis-a-vis sustainability and sustainable finance, vis-a-vis climate finance. And from there, from those conversations will become the seed of new ideas, new approaches, new collaborations. And so, that's the takeaway for me of how the organizations really fit with the structural engineering experience. Those two organizations in particular are aiming at creating data that is useful, that comes from structural engineering, but that is useful for a wide variety of industries. So in the case of U.S. Resiliency Council, being able to rate buildings. So it came from a subcommittee of the SEONC Existing Buildings Committee, which has now become the SEONC Resilience Committee, and no longer a subcommittee. And the idea is to provide resilience ratings for building, just like U.S. Green Building Council provides environmental sustainability ratings. And that the idea is provide a metric to be able to acknowledge and get credit for the additional work that a building owner does in order to make their building more robust in the face of a natural disaster. And GEM Foundation produces data to a common scientific standard worldwide for earthquakes that can be used for the insurance industry, but also for disaster preparedness, which is its biggest use case to date.
Yeah, so joining these types of committees, those where they have those committees, there's a need for it already. So if you want to help with resiliency, there's already committees out there for you to join that fulfills a need, not just for structural engineering, but for wider reach? Because I think most of them are involved in FEMA. Is that correct? Like FEMA, and that way during emergencies, is that how they're kind of related in terms of these committees?
FEMA has an important role to play, and there are members of FEMA who participate in committees at various industry organizations. And so FEMA is an enormous organization, so to be able to generalize about them is tough. But there's usually an overlap between what someone at FEMA is doing and what some of the committees in the structural engineering community are doing.
And what about I know you had a varied career in terms of you've been all over the place and different industries. What's the importance of mentors in your career? And can you share how your mentors helped you and maybe what engineers should look for in mentors as well?
Oh, thank you for asking that question, because none of us would be here today. I would not be here today if it weren't for the giants whose shoulders I'm standing on top of, right? So I think that one of the most influential people, I want to give credit where credit is due. We didn't always get along on a personal level. We weren't friends, but I would not be here. I would not have, my thinking would not be shaped the way it has been if it weren't for Chris Poland, the previous CEO of Degenkolb Engineers, because Chris was such a forward thinker in the 90s and 2000s about the role of structural engineering in finance in particular, and thinking ahead of where how structural engineering affects the whole economy. And so one of the seminal papers that Chris contributed to is a publication by SPUR, San Francisco Urban Research. I don't remember the name of the acronym, and the title of the publication is Safe Enough to Stay. And it made the case that housing should be built to a higher performance level than the 1.0, right? Higher importance level, because if people aren't there in the community, then you don't have a community.
Yeah.
And so one of the most important ingredients for recovery is having the people. Yes, you need hospitals. Yes, you need police, but you also need people to stay. And so that publication and that mindset really drove the entire rest of my career. So thank you, Chris. And I really need to mention the late, great Helmut Krauwinkler, who was my advisor at Stanford, who also had this very big picture thinking about how structural engineering touches every dimension of society and how we need to think about the world in both a probabilistic sense, but also a very practical sense. And the diaspora of Helmut Krauwinkler's students have done amazing things because we've all been influenced by this very broad, very heartfelt mode of thinking. So thank you. Thank you, Helmut, up there.
No, that's really cool. Yeah, I also mentioned to students or young professionals where, yeah, someone who you can look up to or get their values. I think that's one of the most important things, because then that kind of just sets your North Star, at least for me, where, oh, I want to strive to do this. Or it looks like in your case, it made structural engineering more than just about engineering, but more of a community wide aspect where, which, yeah, you're completely right in terms of what's the point of a hospital if there's no community around it to serve.
I think most of us enter the structural engineering profession because deep in our hearts, we're do-gooders. We want to make the world a better place and a safer place. And, if we think about that in a more broadly than just an individual building, it's really only a very small step to think about it in terms of how do we make the community more resilient, and how do we make the neighborhood more resilient. One of my influencers, and maybe a mentor, is Daniel Holmesy, who ran the San Francisco Neighborhood Empowerment Network. And ostensibly, I mean, at the root of it, it was for disaster preparedness, but his core value and the whole premise of the initiative was get to know your neighbors. So, when people ask me, what's the number one thing I can do to prepare for a disaster? It's not get your go bag. It's not, have cash on hand. It's get to know your neighbors, because you never know what's going to happen, and you never know what resources other people are going to have that you might not have, or vice versa, where you might be able to pitch in, because we are each other's most valuable resources.
Oh, what was one final piece of advice that you'd like to share with structural engineers who are thinking about stepping into leadership, pushing innovation, or maybe even starting their own entrepreneurship, their own companies?
something that you already said, which is be able to articulate your North Star. Most of us already have a North Star. It's just a matter of being able to articulate it and then organizing all of your activities, all of your communications, all of your intentions around that one North Star. And whether that's, making your neighborhood more resilient, or whether it's, building a generational wealth for your family and getting out of whatever generational legacy you might have had.
Yeah. And I think I'm thinking back on my career too. Yeah, having those mentors with you was so important because I'm just thinking about it. And it's like, yeah, a lot of my values came from them. There was something that was driving them or what their values were that resonated inside me. And I think that's a big part of it. What mentorship is, they can cultivate that inside of you and help you find that North Star. Because finding your North Star sounds easy, but it changes, might change, but it's something that's very important because that's what's going to keep you going in terms of getting through any industry. So I appreciate that, Kate.
Yeah, that conviction that mentors give is just so contagious.
Absolutely. Kate, thanks so much for coming on and sharing. I really enjoyed you sharing with everything and all of your valuable advice too. So thanks a lot.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed the episode today. We would love to hear your feedback, comments, and/or questions. To leave them, please visit structuralengineeringchannel.com. There you'll find a summary of the key points discussed in today's episode, as well as links to any of the resources or websites mentioned during this episode. Don't forget to subscribe to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Until next time, we wish you the best in all of your structural engineering endeavors.